There's no scare tactics whatsoever in what we talk about. We control our own environment, and that's what we're doing, empowering those that listen to understand what it is and maybe things they can do about it. So,
I'm Casey Main, a jaded, hopelessly romantic, health-conscious party girl searching for meaning. And my mission is simple: to make life better, for myself and for you. I believe real change always comes from within, and the Better You podcast was born to discover hidden parts of ourselves and our stories. A safe place where we have real, honest conversations with people from all walks of life to help better understand ourselves so we can become better versions of ourselves. So come along on this journey of discovery with me so you can become a better you. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Better You podcast. I am your host, Casey Main. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. If this is your first time here, our podcast is focused on better understanding our relationship with ourselves. I believe that that is the most important relationship we will ever be in. It's the only one that we are in our entire lives. Like, there's no getting out of it. And I think just the more we understand it, the healthier and better our relationships are with everybody else, actually, because we understand kind of how, when, and why we're triggered, how much of that has to do actually with how we're being treated or how we're interacting with the world versus how much of it is maybe stuff we've got going on that we've carried in from the past. And so we really just focus on going inward, self-awareness, self-reflection, and trying to figure out what we've got going on within us. And our conversations typically fall under one of three buckets. So like mind, body, or spirit, because I think all three of those things play a really big role in terms of how we interact with others and our environment. And this one is definitely a body episode because we are talking about EMF radiation, which I was not even aware that this was a thing until a couple years ago. I first heard about it, I believe, on Dave Asprey's Bulletproof podcast. And honestly, like, I was nervous to have this conversation because when I listened to that podcast on EMF, I ended up like immediately giving away my microwave. So I was afraid that talking to our guest today, Daniel, would mean me wanting to make like a bunch of drastic changes in my life. But luckily, that isn't the case. The strategies that he gives us to manage like unnecessary exposure to EMF radiation are very practical and totally doable. So this is not a scary episode. I think it is really important to just understand how all of this technology that we all now have with us kind of constantly throughout the day. And, you know, we've got them in our hands. We were plugging things into our ears. We've got things on our wrists. Like, it's just everywhere. So I think it's important to understand how that's maybe affecting our health and then what you can do to really minimize any negative implications. So a little bit more about our guest today. Daniel DeBaun is an internationally recognized expert in EMF radiation, EMF shielding, and EMF-related health issues with special focus on the effect of exposure from mobile devices such as laptops, tablets, and cell phones. Daniel's concern regarding the health impact of EMF emissions grew from over 30 years of engineering experience in the telecommunication industry, where he held a variety of executive positions at SAIC, Telcordia, AT&T, and Bell Labs. He is the inventor of DefenderShield, the most effective EMF radiation protection technology for mobile devices ever developed, and is the co-author of Radiation Nation, The Fallout of Modern Technology, the complete guide to EMF radiation safety and protection. But before we hear from Daniel, I do have a couple quick announcements. This week, I'm going to do something new. I'm going to read the most recent 5-star review that the podcast has gotten. And I'm going to do that because I get so excited every time a new review comes in, but also shamelessly with the hope that it will encourage you to leave a review as well. As you probably know, when it comes to promoting anything on the interwebs, it all comes down to the freaking algorithms that determine whether or not your stuff gets seen. And the podcasting algorithms love reviews. And really, so do I, because it helps me know whether or not I'm continuing to bring you all content that is like relevant, interesting, and inspiring. And I just love hearing from you all. So I'm going to start reading reviews that I get. This week's review is from ES Listens, who says, I'm not a fan of self-help books, but I do enjoy opportunities to reflect on my strengths and weaknesses and how to better myself. And this podcast allows me to do just that. Both Casey and the guests she has on are relatable. I highly recommend. Thank you very much, ES Listens. Ironically, I was never into anything self-help either for the longest time. And I actually still really struggle with that word and seeing myself as in that industry. I prefer the term personal development or personal growth, but ultimately, I guess it is self-help. We are helping ourselves better understand ourselves so that we can be better versions of ourselves. And so there's nothing wrong with self-help. I've got to get over that. But I just thought it was funny because I totally know what she means when she says, I'm not a fan of self-help books. And I'm assuming she's a she, but maybe he is a he. So yes, listens, if you are a he, sorry about that. I would love to hear from you all. So if you have not left a review yet, please do. Okay, our next announcement involves discounts, which everybody loves a discount. And as I promised last week, we now have a discount code for Clean Machine plant-based fitness nutrition products. So they make a protein powder, BCAAs, a great omega-3 product, and even a testosterone supplement. And all of their products are 100% natural, non-GMO, gluten-free, and vegan. And they're actually doing a special promo in March for March Madness. And so this code will get you 35% off of your order. 35%. So go to cleanmachineonline.com and use the code. You might want to write this down, or actually don't worry, I'll put it in the show notes. KM, so for Casey Main, KM, and then the number 2, and then CMA for like Clean Machine Affiliate. So KM2CMA, and you will get 35% off your entire order, and that is at cleanmachineonline.com. So I'll put it in the show notes. It's also up on the shop page of my website, which is caseymain.com/shop, where I have all of my affiliates and then just really more products that I'm not an affiliate for, but just strongly believe in. And so this was a fun surprise to me, but as you'll hear in the episode, Daniel's company, DefenderShield, has given us a code to get 20% off of their products. So that code is easier to remember. It is the better you. So all one word, the better you. And you can use it for any of the products that they sell on their website, which is DefenderShield.com. And as you'll hear us discuss in the episode, since I am at a computer all day, I have the blue light blocking glasses, which I am a big fan of. They have definitely helped my sleep since I started wearing them while looking at a computer all day. I also have their cell phone case, which is actually really great because it's got space for you to put a couple cards and cash in, and it has a little wristlet attachment. So it's like a mini clutch that holds everything you need. Like most of the time, it's all I take out with me. On the rare occasion I leave my house. Just kidding. I do go out, just not really to the fun places I used to. Anyways, I digress. I also have their earbuds. So I am clearly a big fan of their products. And as we get into this week's episode, I'm sure you will hear and understand why. So again, that is DefenderShield.com and use the code TheBetterYou, all one word, for 20% off. Okay, so let's get into what we talk about in this episode. Daniel and I discuss what EMF radiation is, where it's coming from, and what the research shows that the health implications are. The issues with the current regulatory standards and why we are not more aware of the dangers associated with all the technology we have totally come to depend on. Why this is an especially important issue when it comes to children. The new 5G that's coming and what that means for our health. And most importantly, practical things we can do to significantly limit our exposure so that we will be okay. Do not worry, this is not all doom and gloom. There really is a lot that we can control. And I love what Daniel says, that we are the architect of our environment. All right, so we are going to jump into this conversation with Daniel, but real quick, I want to remind everyone that the audio version of my book is still available for free on the podcast. It is episodes 27, 28, and 29, and I am leaving it up throughout Lent, which ends on April 12th. So if you are interested in listening to it for free, you have until April 12th to do so. Do not let the title throw you off. Like, yes, it does talk quite a bit about relationships, but mostly it is a book about, not surprisingly, our relationship with ourselves and how that can get really off track. And it is really my story of realizing that and then trying to correct it. So, all right, here we go. Let's talk to Daniel about EMF radiation and what we can do to defend ourselves against it. So let's begin with just your story and your background and kind of how you got into this extremely specialized subject.
Quite a number of years ago, actually in the late 70s, I ended up working in Bell Labs, and that evolved to writing standards, telecommunication standards, and testing electronics equipment to make sure they're compliant to those standards. So I did this for quite a number of years in my career. And so I had a detailed understanding of our electrical environment and electromagnetic radiation environment. And probably, I don't know, 8, 9 years ago, my wife and I had our sons visiting us, and they had their laptops in their laps. And my wife said, "I want grandchildren. Get that stuff off your laps." And they were doing it 3 or 4 hours at a time. And I looked over to my wife and I said, "You got to be kidding me. The power levels of what's coming out of a laptop like that is so very low. It cannot interfere with biological functions." Well, that's what I said. So I said, "But wait a minute, maybe just check. Let me see what's going on in the research world to see if anything was potentially associated with the emissions." And I was very, very surprised to find out that we already knew that after 3 or 4 hours, 25% of the male sperm is likely immobile. And I said, how could that possibly be? How could it be that nobody knew that? And particularly, why didn't I know that? Because I should have known that if it was true. Well, I did a little bit more investigation, and I found that, back, for 20, 30, 40 years, we knew that emissions from that were now entering into our environment had potential for interfering with biological functions of the body. So I said to myself, well, if you're going to continue using that stuff, I can design something for you to use your laptop. So I made a laptop device, now what we call the Defender Pad. And they put their laptop on their lap, and when they used it, they were relatively safe. Still went into the air, but immediate exposures directly to the body were being prevented. So several years later, I became more and more frustrated that there was all this research going on in the world, and somehow we didn't know it. And for me, it was like smoking cigarettes. I smoked when I was 12 years old, which was quite a number of years ago. And at that time, that meant I was a big man. Research knew at that time there was a direct link between cancer, just knew it. It wasn't common knowledge. So I started going towards the path of helping people better understand the environment we're in. That's why I wrote Radiation Nation, a book that talks about what are the electromagnetic radiation sources in our lives, what does research know about it, and maybe what's some of the things we can do about it to try to help improve those exposures in our environment. That's how I got started.
So I love that story, and I love that your wife kind of just looked at the situation and thought, I want grandchildren, so take these electronic devices off your laps. And this is why I think this is such an important conversation, because we kind of, like you did, assume that it's fine because it's been in our life for some people, their entire lives, depending on how old you are now. And I don't know, it's like we kind of like to think that these products or these things wouldn't be put out into the world in front of us and become such a daily part of our lives if they were bad for us. But that isn't always the case. So I feel like the questioning the normality of it is an important aspect in all things, but this in particular, because when you take away how used to all of it we are, and you really just think about it, of course it makes sense that we have these electronic devices that have the ability to talk to the watch on our wrist or the earphones in our ears or a device across the room. Something is happening there that's very real, and to think it wouldn't affect our bodies is a little bit silly.
Absolutely a fact. In fact, what's interesting is I used to test one piece of equipment and look for interference with another piece of equipment. It turns out there's literally energy being created, and it can potentially interfere with other electronics. Guess what? We're electronic. Our bodies use interconnections to create body functions. And why wouldn't we logically think it can interfere? Just no one really thought about it too much.
Exactly. Okay. So let's get to the basics of like, what is EMF and where is it all coming from? Like what devices are emitting it?
Electromagnetic radiation doesn't exist in our environment at all, except the Earth generates 12 hertz. That's 12 cycles of electromagnetic radiation. That's DC. So there is a part of the electromagnetic radiation field that has existed since the dawn of man, and our bodies have gotten used to it. It's also true that when you look at light, the rays of light that you see, they are electromagnetic radiation, but the power levels of those are very, very low. And since the dawn of man, we've gotten used to it. Everything else we talk about from here on in is about what man made, what we created and put into our environment. So when you introduce alternating current, household wiring in a house, the byproduct of the current flow, when you have a light bulb on and energy is being absorbed, emissions come from that wall. And it's called extremely low frequency emissions. So there is radiation around us. Generally speaking, it's not too much of been a big deal because we don't put our heads against the wall when there's electrical current running through. So there's not as much emissions. And the fact that we're a little bit of distance from it is why it doesn't interfere. However, if you had a 10,000 volt line, really, really high power, these massive girders of bringing these high powered lines down, you can take a light bulb, a fluorescent light bulb, walk in front of it, and the light bulb will light up. There's so much energy being generated by those lights. But by and large, most of us don't get exposed to those kinds of things. And then came along laptops, cell phones, tablets, devices now generating Bluetooth signals, Wi-Fi signals, cell phone radiating signals. And all of a sudden, we have those things in our lives. In fact, the standard was created in 1996 to protect us from that. What's interesting is that standard was so it doesn't heat up too much. Our skin doesn't heat up too much. Why would I say that? Well, a microwave signal, the microwave in your oven, which I don't use, but a microwave in your oven generates a 2.3 gigahertz signal. That's 2.3 billion cycles per second. It heats the water up between cells oscillate, and voila, you have cooked meat. Well, the thermal part of a cell phone is 2.4 gigahertz, Wi-Fi is 2.4 gigahertz, 1.9 gigahertz, which is roughly the same signal rate, and it's heating up your head. So it's very, very low. It's not like a microwave oven, but it is a thermal emitting signal. So when we talk about things we want to do to help ourselves in our new environment, you talk about what you can do with cell phones. Do you really want to close to your head? Do a little bit of distance? Oh my goodness, a little bit of distance is a lot when you talk about those low power levels, and there's no dangers whatsoever. But against your head, it becomes more dangerous. So 10, 15 years ago, when the standard was created, 1996, I had a cell phone, but none of my friends had a cell phone. So I didn't use it very much. And now when you have kids that are 8 years old, they're given cell phones on their birthday to talk to all their friends. And it's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for all of us. So all of a sudden we have all of these devices transmitting signals into our environment that 10, 15 years ago didn't exist. And that's what we want to talk about today.
So, okay, real quick though, because you mentioned the sun and light and how we've gotten used to that. Is there any evidence that we will get used to the man-made versions of it as well?
There's no doubt man's body evolves in its environment. So 300 years from now, I'm not sure how much of a problem it would be, if any at all. But certainly today, the body's trying to figure out how to adapt to the now new environment, and it's having challenges doing that.
Right, because we went from, I mean, just even in my lifetime, we went from, it was car phones, and then it became cell phones.
Yeah.
And then now there's Wi-Fi everywhere you go, like you're constantly bathed in Wi-Fi, and then with all the Bluetooth between everything. So, I mean, it's very rapidly changed. Okay, so let's talk about how exactly is it affecting us? Like, what are the health risks?
I'll give you a litany of potential things you worry about. There's neurological impacts. When you have a cell phone very close to your head, it literally interferes with the frontal lobe operations. It's electrical. So there's a neurological kind of influence. There's a physiological. There's tingling in your hand. Your eye may hurt. Your ears ring, tendinitis. You maybe get headaches. Insomnia, you don't sleep at night. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because that's sort of important. You're depressed. You have burning sensations when you have a cell phone in your hand. Flu-like symptoms. There's all sorts of kinds of ramifications or exposures that you don't really know, unless you really begin understanding your environment and how to minimize those exposures.
Okay, and so then there's studies that prove all of these effects, correct?
I believe you're wearing blue light blocking glasses.
I am, yes.
Okay. If you were not wearing blue light blocking glasses, you would be looking at a screen, and there would be a electromagnetic radiation blue light coming off the screen. The difference between that blue light and the sun blue light is that it's more intense, believe it or not. All our electronic devices have more intense signaling with LEDs. So when you're looking at it without your blue light glasses, it's going into your eye, and it can create dry eye. It can cause macular degeneration, premature macular degeneration. I deal with few clinicians in our business, and one of them was telling me how he had one of his coworkers was looking at a screen all the time, and she always had a dry eye for 10 years. I said, well, what's her problem? Do you know? Well, she has dry eye. I said, well, is she looking at a screen a lot? Well, yeah, but I just give her drops. And I said, I'm going to send you a pair of blue light glasses. And she got the glasses. Within 2 hours, the 10 years of dry eye went away, and she had wet eyeballs. I mean, it's literally true. He didn't know that the blue light from a CDR or a screen monitor can actually influence. So there are those kinds of things. Even more concerning, particularly if you use a tablet or a laptop at night before you go to bed, there's a little switch behind your eye that turns melatonin on and off. So if you're looking at a screen and you close it at 11 o'clock and you expect to sleep, you won't, because the melatonin process has been hampered. It takes time to build up the melatonin within your body, so you have a sound sleep. So it interrupts the melatonin, which interrupts the circadian rhythm, which interrupts a bunch of other stuff as a result of simply looking at a monitor at night before you go to bed.
Yeah, I bought these blue light blocking glasses a couple years ago when I first I started listening to Dave Asprey's podcast, and so I know he wrote the foreword for your book.
Yes, exactly.
And I had listened to something that talked about EMF, and then I immediately gave away my microwave the next day. And I bought blue light blocking glasses, and then I have the cell phone case that you guys make, and I have the earbuds too, although they just recently broke, so I need to get another pair. But I and myself have found, like, I don't suffer from any obvious side effects like dry eye or anything like that, but I am at a computer all day.
Yep.
And what I did notice is, so then for Christmas, I got one of these Garmin watches, which now I'm like, okay, but now I've got the Bluetooth component. But it was interesting to track my sleep, and I get a decent amount of REM sleep, but not a lot of deep sleep. And I was like, that's so interesting. And so I've just started to pay attention to it. And I went on a road trip recently down to South Florida, and that day that I drove all day, so I was not in front of a screen all day, that day I got I got great deep sleep. So
Yeah.
even though I don't have any obvious physical symptoms, I'm aware, I know the research. It just makes sense to me even without the research. And so I've started to find some evidence of how it is affecting me that maybe I'm not even aware of.
Yeah, you're taking precaution within our environment, and it's sort of easy to do, and it does impact what happens. When you start thinking about the environment that we're living in and having these things in our lives, some of us feel it. Most of us don't. So if you don't feel it, I'm not sure you think you have a problem. But in this case, you can tell the difference if you look at comparisons. But do you know over 20% of us feel it? There's no question. There's a direct correlation between emissions and exposure to the body, and over 20% of us feel it. It's electromagnetic radiation hypersensitivity. 80% of that number is women.
Wow.
I don't know why. Science does not know why. We speculate it's hormonal. It's the aluminum that you're taking in the pills you take. There's a lot of potential reasons why, but women more so than men will feel it. There's no doubt. That's statistically significant numbers. So when you have a headache and you're a woman and you look at this stuff most of the time, you may want to look towards this possibly as the source of those problems.
Okay. And then you talk a lot in the book about how children are extremely susceptible. So explain a little bit why it's so important, the exposure levels for children.
So I've mentioned a little bit about this standard that was created in 1996. It's 1.6 watts per kilogram. And in other words, if I'm an adult man, 6-foot man, I put a cell phone on my head. The standard says the signal can go in 1 to 2 inches in my head and heat up by 1 to 2 degrees. That's allowable on the standard. Talks nothing about the biological. So, as I mentioned before, in 96, I had a cell phone. I had no one to call. So I really never really used it directly against my head because they were the huge things you carried around in a briefcase. Fast forward to today, all of us use it. It turns out the 6-foot male represents 3% of the population. A female that's 5'6", teenager, a child, every one of those kinds of demographics has a different impact. For a child that's 6 years old, 1.6 watts per kilogram goes completely through their head. And so you're worried about, of course, potentially the heat, but more so you're worried about the biological. And the neurological and physiological stuff I talked about before, you got to remember, 6 years old, their whole lives are going to be exposed to that. That may be a more serious problem as time goes on for the child.
That's so crazy to me that the regulation, first of all, is so old, and then also only talks about the heating up component.
Yeah.
So, all right. So you said back when your wife first brought this up and you were like, all right, well, let me look into the research. And it turns out we did know that this was an issue. Like, what did the research show then? And then, like, why was nothing more done about it?
The standard was 96. And what they did was they took Army data about soldiers and they made an assumption, those who were doing the work made an assumption there's only a thermal impact. The people making those choices were engineers. Mm-hmm. I have friends of mine, not friends, business associates that I had that worked with me that went to the FCC. They were brilliant engineers. So the standards body had brilliant engineers, but not one person had any medical background. Not one person had a clinical expertise. Not one person studied his PhD in the neurological impact of a cell phone. None of those expertise existed with the governance body at the time, and they still don't.
That's just so crazy to me that we wouldn't be thinking, okay, how is this affecting our bodies? And but I guess that happens everywhere. I mean, look at,
of course,
what's in all of our food these days, what's in a lot of our products. No one is asking, okay, well, what is this doing to our bodies long term?
Like, what was it? For 30 some years ago, there was an oil we used to cook our French fries in. trans fats. So there was this lowly chemical engineer who said, you know what? The eggs are not killing us. It's the trans fats we're cooking with. The trans fats we're putting into our food that's killing us. And he was a lone wolf saying that this was a problem. Over 30 some odd years before it got banned, it was only banned last year. So it's typical. Anytime you see introduction of any technologies, it takes many, many years to accumulate enough information to have it understood by all of us as a potential problem in our environment, and we finally address it. I don't see this any differently. I actually think it tracks smoking, trans fats, all these kinds of things introduced in our environment.
So then how far away do you think we are from changes being made in, I don't know if it would be how these devices are made or just more awareness and encouragement to protect ourselves against them? Or when will kind of the public knowledge and regulation catch up with what the research is showing?
So wonderful question. I always like to respond to that with the courts will decide. I mean, the fact is, when I was 12 years old smoking cigarettes, research knew it. It took 40 years before we have a little thing on the side of a cigarette pack says you're going to die if you smoke. It takes that amount of years, 30, 40. So fast forward to cell phones, laptops, tablets. We're just beginning to see it in court. In Italy, for example, there was a case in which an individual using a cell phone passed away from frontal lobe cancer. And they brought the cell phone industry to court. And it took 4 or 5 years. But ultimately, after the second pass at trying to get it through, the cell phone industry lost. So that happened in Italy. We already see the FCC, who develops a standard for us, not the FDA, who know the chemical implications, the biological implications. The FCC doesn't have that. But they're already being questioned by legislation. And then there are law firms that are taking up some litigation efforts to go after the fact that the standards have not been tested since 96, and they only were referred to thermal. So how much longer? 5, 10, 15 years, in my opinion. It takes that amount of time to go through this stuff.
And I feel like, hasn't there been some, maybe it wasn't legislation, maybe this is just something that's talked about and is a little bit more aware now of, in terms of living in close proximity to like one of those big cell phone towers?
If you live within 1,000 yards of a cell phone tower, you're 3 times more likely to have cancer.
Oof.
3 times more likely. If you live near the wires, those high 10,000 volt lines we talked about, you're 3 times more likely to have cancer. So we know from some research statistics that there is clear evidence of increases to biological responses, and don't live within 1,000 foot of a cell tower.
See, I feel like that alone, like there should be legislation already.
I'm not so worried about the cancer, believe it or not. I actually think it's more the neurological impacts, the physiological impacts. We see our kids in classrooms. They have Wi-Fi and repeaters in one classroom all day. They have every kid has a transmitter all day. I think we as parents, we should be worried more about that than we should be, are we going to get cancer?
Okay. Yeah. I want to get into the big 5, as you call them, and what we can do. So like what we can control to make it better. But first, I have to get your thoughts on, because I've heard a lot of people talking about this in like the biohacking world, the 5G that's coming.
Okay.
So
yeah, that's a hard question, but I'll try to simplify as best I can. Up to 4G, which is 4th generation, the signal of a cell phone goes up to about 2 gigahertz, 2 billion cycles per second. And with all the preponderance of evidence of research, we really do know pretty well in the research side that there are many problems that this creates for our body. from cancers straight just to headaches. So we know all that. And that's up to 2 gigahertz. 5G is about increasing the speeds of our network with no delays. So you can put a movie to your set top in 2 minutes, full movie versus 1 hour. So there's increasing the speeds so the customer can use stuff more quickly and have more bandwidth available to get what they want when they want it. So here comes 5G. And this is sort of important. 5G is many signals, a lot of them 2 to 4 gigahertz, 2 to 6 gigahertz. So there's new increases that haven't existed beyond the 2 gigahertz we've talked about. And so those new things, they could be more dangerous. We just don't know. It's never been in the networks before. And the big issue, the one that's most disconcerting for those who follow 5G, is that there's concern that the small cell site in front of your house that has 23 gigahertz, that's 23 billion cycles per second directed directly towards your house, it can only go 750 feet. So you're going to have every 750 feet another small cell site. Mm-hmm. And those are orders of magnitude faster. And there's been literally no study work whatsoever. So there's concern that there will be problems. What we know, by the way, is bugs, the stuff in the stomach, virus and bacteria within the stomach, it loves the increased frequency rates. So we already know in some cases that we extrapolate, it's going to influence immune systems. But we really don't know because there's really not been enough research and scientific work to really substantiate any claim you make. But if you were to extrapolate from what we know, it's probably going to be worse because of the unknown. There's not been one study whatsoever that's substantive that gives guidance to us at these higher levels.
Is there any push for the FDA, not that they're the greatest regulatory body in themselves, but at least somebody looking out for our biological well-being, to get involved or maybe even just kind of have some kind of checks and balance with the advancement of technology?
None that have been effective. There is literally nothing in a marketplace that's been effective. Although I need to tell you, there are so many who have been trying. Mm-hmm. And they're getting traction, including legislative bodies have been dealing with it to some extent. But there's nothing that's been substantiated that will actually change. We know if you lived in Switzerland, by the way, they've stopped 5G deployments. Mm-hmm. So other parts of the world are beginning to slow some of the stuff down until we have a better grasp of it. And they just recently turned it down. And they're waiting to see what happens in the environment.
Okay. All right. So no one's really looking out for us, which means we've got to look out for ourselves. Yeah. All right. So let's go through the big five and kind of what we as individuals can do to decrease our exposure. So the first one is the obvious one, cell phones.
Before we chat about that, you are the architect of your environment. Mm-hmm. You control your environment. What you can't, you don't worry about. But to start off, all of these guidance are with what you can control. And cell phones. When you have a cell phone to your head, that's the worst potential danger. If it's for a few minutes, don't worry about it. If it's for 5 hours, you really should rethink having a cell phone directly to the head. But cell phones, 1 to 2 feet away, almost 80% of the potential dangers to the frontal lobe are gone.
So just you should talk on speakerphone.
Yeah, you got to talk on a speakerphone or use earbuds like you have.
But not the wireless Bluetooth earbuds. Or is the Bluetooth significantly less harmful?
No, it is not. If anybody tells you they're not, they do not know science. We've mentioned 1.6 watts per kilogram, right? That's the standard. A Bluetooth is 0.3 watts per kilogram, 5 times less power level. But there has been studies where we know that 0.1 watts, 15 times the power level less, can damage the cell of the brain. So when you have earbuds, Bluetooth earbuds, where one is talking to the other, it's literally going through your head.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's 0.3 watts. That's 3 times what we know potentially can damage a cell in the brain. So I recommend you don't have Bluetooth earbuds.
Okay. So cell phone, talk on speakerphone, or earbuds with a cord, none of the AirPod stuff. That's
right.
Okay.
Just keep it away. By 4 foot, 98% is gone. So your distance is such a friend when using all of these technologies.
Okay. All right. Next up is laptops.
Same thing. They use Wi-Fi, most of them, and Bluetooth as well, which you can turn on. So, by the way, with a cell phone, sort of an important point is, and here's a general way of looking at it. When you have an environment, you have to look for all the sources of toxins. Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cell phone, it's considered a toxin. In fact, World Health Organization calls it a 2B carcinogenic. It's potentially a dangerous carcinogenic. And so you want to think of that as a bee in the room. One bee won't kill you, 1,000 will. So the whole notion is turn off that which you're not using, push it away, that which you're using, reduce the number of bees in the room. Now that I said that, a cell phone has 3 bees transmitting: Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and cell. Mm-hmm. Do you need all 3? No, most of the time you don't. Turn the ones you're not using off. So the other thing you can do is put in airplane mode for the cell tower, but also turn the transmitters off that you're not using. And that reduces those exposures and risks potentially.
Okay. All right. So then laptops also have several Bs because there's the Bluetooth, there's the Wi-Fi. But as far as the laptop themselves, so I'm going to assume you would recommend not using it directly on your lap.
It's actually more. It is. They call it a laptop, but don't put it on your lap because of the potential dangers, right?
So is this another case where distance is our friend? So like I have my laptop on a table, I'm sitting at a chair. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, better.
There's no question about it. It's very simple to do.
Okay. So tablets is another one in the big 5, which I assume same kind of thing. Turn off the transmitters you're not using. Don't sit with it on your lap, especially not in bed reading before you go to sleep.
And think of this too. You know, you're connecting to a router when you have a Wi-Fi. You should always have a Wi-Fi router farthest away you can get it, where people typically in your family don't sit. So you can put it into your garage. And it works throughout the house. But the distance is what makes it safe for you. If you have it in the house, in a closet somewhere, that's better than if it's in the same room you're in 8 hours a day. But for some of us, we can't get rid of it. So what you may want to do is make sure it's at least 10 foot away. If it's at night, get a $10 timer. Plug it into the wall, a little timer that turns it off at 10 o'clock and turns it on at 6 o'clock in the morning. That little timer eliminates that bee all night. You mentioned the bedroom a minute. That's sort of one of those things that I was talking with a lady, really cool podcast lady, and I was telling her, get your cell phones out of your bedroom. Mm-hmm. And she was being very polite to me. She was, that's okay. Thank you so much. She didn't believe a word I was saying. Her husband had his cell phone there and she had hers because she thought it was important to answer it at night. And I said, it screws up so much. It's not only the creation of melatonin, but it interferes with the creation all night. In fact, electromagnetic radiation literally impedes immune. Your whole immune system is being suppressed as a result of these things. So you want nothing in your bedroom, absolutely nothing. So about a month later, she called me up and she said, my husband and I are sleeping. We're finally sleeping at night. Will you come back on a podcast with me? It was like, listen, it really does affect some of us more so than others. So you really want the sanctuary clean as you can.
Right, because you're sleeping. You don't need any of that technology. I brought my cell phone out of the room a while ago, but I just recently, and I keep thinking I want to do this, but then I'm forgetting to do it. So the timer is a good idea is just turning the Wi-Fi off at night altogether. Like there's no need to be basking in it.
Right, exactly. You don't need it. Your family doesn't need it. Just turn it off. Turn it back on and you're pretty safe.
Okay, so the last one on the big 5 list is smart meters. What are smart meters and how do people know if they have them?
Well, a smart meter is a reading device of how much power consumption you have with your power company, your alternating current. You have 110 watts to 20 volts of service. And it used to be they had this meter that just chunks away and reads all the power you use. And then you have a technician come around and read how much power you used. And that's how you were charged. A smart meter eliminates that technician from coming out and reading it. It's transmitting the information to some other source, power company source, that doesn't have to dispatch anyone to read it. They read it and they can charge you for power consumption. So that meter is a 1 gigahertz signal typically. It's close to what we use for cell phones. And so it's just like a cell phone. And it's transmitting typically periodically. They don't constantly transmit, but periodically, depending on the circumstances, could be as much as 1 second for every second they can transmit. So people, particularly hypersensitive, can feel that. So this is what I tell people. If it's at the side of your garage, you have 2 cars in that garage, you have a kitchen, and then you have your bedroom. Don't worry about it. Your distance is really keeping you quite safe. There's nothing to worry about. If you have a meter, a smart meter that's on the outside of your house, on the inside is your bedroom, and your head post is right against that wall, move the bed. Just move the bed. Make it as far as you can get away from it, because you want to be at least 10 foot away when you sleep from that transmitter. And by and large, you should be pretty much okay by keeping that distance. So you really should know if you have a smart meter or not, and what you can do about it or what you need to worry about. And most of us don't need to worry, so you shouldn't be concerned.
Okay, so this is encouraging because ultimately it comes down to distance and then also kind of going back to wires. So, anything that is wireless with the Bluetooth or the Wi-Fi, just, hardwire back in like we all used to in the old days. So just kind of remove the, I guess, quote unquote, conveniences of the wireless technology and we should be fine.
Yeah, actually, Ethernet cables are a better pathway for data. So you improve the rates when you're watching your Roku on your TV, your Apple TV. Having an Ethernet connection is eliminating the bee in the room and improving the service you're getting.
Yes, that's true. Because you're not competing with the bandwidth quite as much.
Right. You have more bandwidth available and it's faster and quicker and so on. So yeah, simple things like that, they're not too much of an inconvenience. I said before, if you use a cell phone and it's a couple of minutes and then you put it aside, you never have to worry. It's duration of time, exposure and duration of time. If it's going to be really, really long, you really want to be aware of it, because that's when you increase. After 10 years of heavy use, you're 3 times more probable to get cancer of the brain from a cell phone, because you're putting it next to your head for 10 years. Yeah. You just have to be careful to not do that.
Right. So quick calls here and there, nothing to really stress out about. But if you have a job or you're just an extremely chatty person and you find yourself constantly on the phone, then do speakerphone or earbuds.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm telling you, earbuds, I'm using my earbuds. That's all I use. And I'm although I have a cell phone case cover, which also protects. I never used a cell phone outside of that wasn't protected in some way, because I've always been concerned a bit about those kinds of transmitting signals. But I use it all the time now, and I don't worry about duration, distance. I don't worry about any of those things.
Okay.
But when I put it down, I move it 4 foot away.
Yeah. Well, see, that's a whole other conversation, is all of our inability to put down our cell phones these days.
You're in a car and you want to talk on your Bluetooth to the speaker in your machine. Take the cell phone and put it down on the floor of the passenger side. You move the transmitters away from your body by 3-4 foot. You're pretty safe, believe it or not. And you have the convenience of using the modern devices. Just knowing where it is, moving it aside is a basic precautionary protection that helps you deal with this modern environment we live in.
Awesome. Okay. Well, good. I'm glad to end on a positive note. All right. So for everyone who wants to learn more about this, tell them where they can find and purchase your book, as well as the different products you guys sell through DefenderShield.
You can go to DefenderShield.com, and at DefenderShield.com, you'll find a couple of things. You'll find current events. We keep our Facebook very current, trying to share as much as we can about what's going on in the industry. So when you talk about legislative, you talk about research, we try to be up to date. We have one section of DefenderShield.com that has its education. If you'd like to look up and see if there's links to leukemia, for example, we have the current most up-to-date kind of information about those kinds of things. If you just want a book to try to understand it, DefenderShield.com has Radiation Nation. And then, of course, if you're thinking about products that you could find as a way of providing protection for the user of any of these modern technologies we have, you'll find them as well.
Awesome.
And I think we have a coupon code for you as well.
Oh, I was actually going to ask you guys about that. That would be awesome.
Yeah, you're going to have to add it in, but yes, we have a coupon code for you. I'm sure we do.
Wonderful. Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And I think it's such an important conversation, and I was scared to have it, but I feel much better that, I don't know, I guess it's more controllable than I realized it was going to be. And our bodies are very resilient. I believe that. So it's if we can decrease our exposure in kind of the ways we talked about, then we should be okay.
You're okay. Yeah. And don't worry about the stuff you can't control.
Yep. That's true. Okay. Well, that's a whole life motto in itself.
Right. Exactly.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks so much for inviting me. I really do appreciate it as well.
All right, that will do it for this week. Thank you again for listening. Again, please leave a review. Please follow the podcast on the social media channels. It is on Instagram and Facebook at the Better You Podcast. Please follow me on the socials. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, technically on Twitter, although I'm still kind of trying to figure that out. Pinterest. It's all pretty much Casey Main Writes. So WRITES. And I'll link to all of that in the show notes. If you have feedback for me, you can reach me at thebetteryoupodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please send it to some friends that you think will like it as well. I think this is a really important topic, so the more people that know, the better. Check out Clean Machine products. Check out DefenderShield products. Use the code so you can get a discount. I'm very excited to be able to bring all that to you guys. And yeah, I think that's it. I will see you next week.